The distant sounds of a saloon brawl echoed through the dusty streets of Calistoga as Abigail Hayward stared at her husband in disbelief, her hands trembling as he signed away her life for a pouch of gold dust and 3 bottles of Kentucky bourbon. "You can't do this, Thomas," Abigail whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. "I'm your wife, not your property." The year was 1876, and Calistoga, California was thriving due to its famous hot springs and proximity to the nearby silver mines. What had once been a small settlement had grown into a bustling town, attracting those seeking fortune, healing, and occasionally escape from their past. For Abigail, it had become her prison. Thomas Hayward sneered at his wife of 3 years, his eyes bloodshot from days of drinking and gambling. "You were my property the moment your father handed you over with that pathetic dowry," he spat, pocketing the gold dust. "Besides, consider yourself lucky. Old man Jenkins here would have taken just you, but I negotiated for something of actual value." Jenkins, a weathered miner with yellowing teeth and breath that reeked of tobacco, grinned as he reached for Abigail's arm. "Come on, pretty thing. You're mine now. Let go of me." Abigail pulled away, her honey-brown hair falling from its careful arrangement as she backed toward the door of their small cabin. At 24, she had already endured more than most women twice her age. Orphaned at 16 after her parents succumbed to influenza, she had married Thomas, believing his promises of security and kindness. 3 years of bruises and broken promises later, she now faced the ultimate betrayal. "You take what's yours, Jenkins," Thomas said with a dismissive wave, already uncorking one of his newly acquired bottles. "She ain't my problem no more." Jenkins lunged for Abigail, his rough hands grabbing her wrist with enough force to leave marks. She screamed, fighting against his grip as he dragged her toward the door. The door swung open before Jenkins reached it, and a tall figure blocked the threshold. "Sounds like trouble," said a deep voice. The man who stepped inside removed his hat, revealing sun-weathered features and piercing blue eyes that assessed the situation in seconds. "I don't believe the lady wants to go with you." "Mind your business, stranger," Jenkins growled. "I paid fair and square for her." The newcomer's expression darkened. "Paid for her?" His gaze shifted to Thomas, who was already slumped in a chair, drinking straight from the bottle. Then he looked at Abigail, noting her terrified expression and the way she struggled against Jenkins' grip. "Name's Flynn Winters," he said, replacing his hat, "and I've got a particular dislike for men who think women can be bought and sold." Thomas laughed bitterly. "She's his now. We made a deal." Flynn reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch that clinked heavily. "How much did you pay?" Jenkins narrowed his eyes. 200 in gold dust and 3 bottles of Kentucky's finest." "I'll give you double," Flynn said, his voice level. 406 bottles, delivered tomorrow." The room fell silent as Jenkins considered the offer, his grip on Abigail loosening slightly. "Why would you do that?" Jenkins asked suspiciously. "What's she to you?" Flynn's expression remained unreadable. "Let's just say I believe in fair treatment of people, especially those who can't defend themselves. Do we have a deal?" Jenkins glanced between the money pouch and Abigail, calculation evident in his beady eyes. "Make it 500. "Done," Flynn said without hesitation. He tossed the pouch to Jenkins, who caught it with his free hand. "That's the 400. I'll have the rest and the whiskey delivered to your claim tomorrow." Jenkins reluctantly released Abigail's arm. "She better be worth it," he muttered, pocketing the gold. "Get out," Flynn said quietly, his hand resting on the revolver at his hip. After Jenkins departed, Flynn turned to Thomas. "You're a disgrace," he said, his voice cold with contempt. A man who sells his wife doesn't deserve to breathe the same air as decent folk. Thomas snarled and reached for the rifle propped against the wall, but Flynn was faster. In one fluid motion, his revolver was out and aimed at Thomas's chest. "I wouldn't," Flynn warned. "Now I'm taking Mrs. Hayward away from here. You try to follow, you try to claim her back, and I'll make sure you regret it for the very short remainder of your life. Understand?" Thomas glared but nodded, clutching his whiskey bottle like a lifeline. Flynn turned to Abigail. "Gather your things, madam. Only what you need and can carry easily." Abigail stood frozen for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. Then, with shaking hands, she grabbed a carpet bag from under the bed and began stuffing it with her few possessions: 2 dresses, a hairbrush, a small silver locket containing a lock of her mother's hair, and a worn Bible. Flynn kept his gun trained on Thomas as Abigail packed. When she was finished, he gestured for her to precede him out the door. "This ain't over," Thomas called after them. "She's my wife by law." Flynn paused at the door. "A wife you sold for gold and whiskey. I reckon any judge would have something to say about that." He tipped his hat mockingly. "Good day, Mr. Hayward." Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Calistoga. Abigail stood uncertainly beside Flynn, clutching her carpet bag to her chest. "Thank you," she said quietly, "but I don't understand why you would help a stranger." Flynn's expression softened slightly. "Let's get you somewhere safe first. My horse is tied up at the livery." As they walked through town, Abigail was painfully aware of the curious glances from townspeople. Calistoga wasn't large enough for domestic disputes to remain private for long, and she felt the weight of judgment in their stares. "They'll talk," she murmured. "Let them," Flynn replied. "You've done nothing wrong." At the livery, a magnificent chestnut gelding waited patiently. Flynn secured Abigail's bag to the saddle before offering her his hand. "I can't go with you," she said suddenly. "I don't even know you." Flynn nodded. "That's fair. Where would you prefer to go? Do you have family nearby, friends?" Abigail looked down at her hands, twisted together in anxiety. "No, Thomas. He made sure I didn't maintain those connections." "I see," Flynn said grimly. "I have a cabin about 10 miles outside of town. It's not much, but it's clean and safe. You're welcome to stay there while you figure out your next steps. Or I can take you to the hotel in town if you'd prefer." Abigail considered her options. Staying in town meant facing Thomas again, not to mention the gossip. "Your cabin," she decided, "just until I can make other arrangements." Flynn nodded and helped her onto the horse before mounting behind her. As they rode out of town, Abigail kept her eyes forward, refusing to look back at the life she was leaving behind. The warmth of Flynn's chest against her back was strangely comforting, and for the first time in years, she felt something akin to safety. The cabin sat nestled among towering pines, with a small stream running nearby. It was indeed modest, just one main room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a small kitchen area, and a narrow bed in the corner. A small lean-to attached to the side housed firewood and tools. "It's not much," Flynn said as he helped Abigail down from the horse. "But it's peaceful. It's lovely," Abigail replied honestly, breathing in the scent of pine and earth. After the cramped, often violent atmosphere of the cabin she'd shared with Thomas, this place felt like paradise. Flynn busied himself with starting a fire while Abigail stood uncertainly in the middle of the room. "The bed is yours," he said without looking up from his task. "I'll sleep outside in good weather in front of the fire when it's not." "I can't take your bed," Abigail protested. "You can and you will," Flynn replied firmly. "You've been through enough today without adding discomfort to it." As the fire crackled to life, Flynn stood and dusted off his hands. "Are you hungry? I've got some venison stew I can heat up." Abigail nodded, suddenly aware of the hollow feeling in her stomach. She hadn't eaten since breakfast, and even then, it had only been a crust of bread. Thomas often forgot to bring home food, spending their money on cards and whiskey instead. Flynn moved with surprising grace for a man his size, efficiently heating the stew and setting out 2 bowls on the table. They ate in silence, Abigail trying not to show how desperately hungry she was. "Why did you do it?" she asked finally, setting down her spoon. "Pay for my freedom, I mean." Flynn considered her for a long moment before answering. 3 years ago, my sister was in a similar situation. Her husband sold her to settle a gambling debt. His jaw tightened. By the time I found out, it was too late. She didn't survive the experience. Abigail's hand flew to her mouth. "I'm so sorry." Flynn nodded, his eyes distant with memory. "Since then, I've made it my business to intervene when I see similar situations. It doesn't bring Rebecca back, but it gives some meaning to what happened." "That's very noble," Abigail said softly. Flynn's laugh was short and without humor. "I'm not noble, Mrs. Hayward, just trying to balance my ledger a bit." He stood and collected their bowls. "You should rest. Tomorrow will be soon enough to decide what comes next." As darkness fell, Abigail lay in Flynn's bed, listening to the sounds of the forest outside and the occasional crackle from the fire. Flynn had made himself a pallet on the floor near the hearth, his breathing deep and even in sleep. She had never slept apart from Thomas since their wedding day, and the absence of his snoring and the smell of stale whiskey was both strange and liberating. For the first time in years, Abigail fell asleep without fear knots in her stomach. The morning brought golden sunlight streaming through the cabin's single window. Abigail woke to find herself alone, with a note propped against a cup of coffee on the table. "Gone to deliver Jenkins his payment and collect my horse from town. Back by noon. Help yourself to anything you need." F.W. Abigail sipped the coffee, pleasantly surprised to find it still warm. Outside, birds sang in the pines, and the stream gurgled cheerfully. After the oppressive atmosphere of her life with Thomas, this peaceful solitude felt almost overwhelming. She explored the cabin, noting its simple but functional furnishings. Flynn lived plainly but neatly. A small bookshelf held a surprising collection: volumes of poetry by Whitman and Wordsworth, several history books, and a well-worn copy of The Count of Monte Cristo. A man of unexpected depths, Abigail thought, running her fingers along the book spines. By mid-morning, she had swept the cabin floor, washed her face in the stream, and was attempting to mend a tear in one of her dresses when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Her heart quickened with fear. Could it be Thomas? But the rider who appeared was Flynn, leading a second horse, a gentle-looking dun mare. "Good morning," he called, dismounting. "I see you found the coffee." "Thank you," Abigail replied, setting aside her mending. "Did everything go as planned?" Flynn nodded, tethering both horses to a post near the cabin. "Jenkins was happy enough with the exchange. I doubt he'll bother you again." He gestured to the dun mare. "I brought you something." Abigail approached cautiously. "A horse. Her name's Daisy. Thought you might like some independence." "The ability to come and go as you please." Abigail stroked the mare's velvety nose, fighting unexpected tears. It had been so long since anyone had considered her needs or desires. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." Flynn waved away her gratitude. "No need. Consider it part of your fresh start." He hesitated. "Speaking of which, we should discuss what happens next. I meant what I said. You're welcome to stay here while you figure things out." Abigail bit her lip, considering. "I don't have anywhere else to go," she admitted, "but I won't be a burden. I can cook and clean, mend clothes. I'm good with medicinal herbs too, my mother taught me. Flynn smiled, genuinely this time. This place could use a woman's touch, that's certain. And I won't lie, it's been a long time since I've had home-cooked meals regularly. He extended his hand. Partners then, until you decide otherwise. Abigail took his hand, noting the calluses that spoke of hard work and the gentleness with which he held her fingers. Partners, she agreed. The following weeks established a routine between them. Flynn, Abigail discovered, was a skilled hunter and trapper who sold furs and meat to businesses in Calistoga. He was often gone for days at a time, returning with supplies and occasionally small luxuries, a ribbon for her hair, coffee beans, a jar of peach preserves. During his absences, Abigail made the cabin more homely. She fashioned curtains from an old sheet, planted a small herb garden near the stream, and thoroughly cleaned every corner. She discovered a talent for baking using the Dutch oven, and Flynn's appreciative noises when he bit into her fresh bread or berry pies became a source of quiet pride. They rarely spoke of Thomas, though Abigail occasionally caught Flynn watching her with concern when certain sounds, a door slamming, a glass set down too hard, made her flinch. These moments of vulnerability embarrassed her, but Flynn never commented, simply continuing whatever he was doing as if nothing had happened. One evening in late July, as they sat outside watching fireflies dance among the trees, Flynn broke their comfortable silence. I ran into Reverend Holbrook in town today. He mentioned that Thomas Hayward has been telling anyone who'll listen that you ran off with another man. Flynn's voice was carefully neutral. Thought you should know. Abigail stiffened. I suppose that's easier for him than admitting he sold me for whiskey. Likely so. Flynn hesitated. The Reverend also mentioned that Thomas has been asking questions about me, about where I live. Fear clutched at Abigail's heart. Do you think he'll come here? I don't know. But if he's drinking as much as the Reverend says, I doubt he could find his way out of town, let alone to this cabin. Flynn turned to face her. Still, we should be prepared. If you'd feel safer elsewhere, no, Abigail interrupted. I won't be driven away again. This is my home now, too. Flynn's expression softened. Yes, it is. That night, Abigail lay awake longer than usual, thinking about how naturally the word home had come to her lips when speaking of the cabin. In just a few weeks, it had become more of a home than the place she'd shared with Thomas for 3 years. And Flynn. He was becoming something too, something she wasn't ready to name. August brought scorching heat that dried the stream to a trickle and turned the forest floor crisp underfoot. Flynn spent more time at the cabin, repairing the roof and building a small smokehouse for preserving meat for the winter. Abigail found herself watching him as he worked, admiring the play of muscles beneath his shirt, the careful precision with which he handled tools. Sometimes she would catch him watching her too, quickly averting his gaze when their eyes met. They were careful with each other, maintaining invisible boundaries. Flynn never entered the cabin while Abigail was changing clothes. Abigail always announced her approach when Flynn was bathing in the stream. They slept apart, Abigail in the bed, Flynn on his pallet by the fire. Yet despite these boundaries, or perhaps because of them, a tension was growing between them. A tension made of shared smiles over morning coffee, accidental brushes of hands when passing tools, and long conversations under the stars. One evening, as Abigail picked late-season blackberries from bushes near the stream, she heard approaching hoofbeats. Expecting Flynn returning from checking his traps, she smiled and turned toward the sound. The smile died on her lips. Thomas Hayward sat atop a scraggly mare, his face flushed with drink and anger. "Found you at last," he slurred, dismounting unsteadily. Thought you could run off with some stranger." Abigail backed away, the basket of berries clutched to her chest. "You sold me, Thomas. Whatever claim you thought you had is gone." Thomas advanced on her, his bloodshot eyes narrowing. "You're my wife. No fancy talking trapper can change that." "Flynn paid for her fair and square, Hayward," came a voice from behind Abigail. She turned to see Jenkins emerging from the trees, rifle in hand. "Double what I paid you, in fact." Thomas spun around, nearly losing his balance. "What are you doing here?" Jenkins shrugged. "Followed you. Figured you might cause trouble, and I don't like it when people interfere with fair business deals." He gestured at Abigail with his rifle. "She was sold legal-like, twice. Ain't your concern anymore." "She's my wife," Thomas roared. "Not anymore," said Flynn, appearing suddenly from the direction of the cabin, his own rifle leveled at Thomas. "You lost that right when you traded her like cattle." Thomas looked from Jenkins to Flynn, calculating his odds. "This ain't over," he growled. "I'll go to the sheriff." Flynn smiled coldly. "By all means. Tell Sheriff Lawson how you sold your wife for gold and whiskey. I'm sure he'll be very sympathetic." Thomas's face contorted with rage. With a sudden movement, he lunged at Abigail, grabbing her arm and yanking her toward him. Berries scattered across the ground as she cried out in pain. The crack of a rifle split the air. Thomas's grip loosened as he staggered back, clutching his shoulder. Blood seeped between his fingers. "That was a warning," Jenkins said calmly, lowering his smoking rifle. "Next one goes somewhere more vital." Flynn moved swiftly to Abigail's side, positioning himself between her and Thomas. "Get on your horse and ride away," he told Thomas. "Don't ever come back." Thomas glared at them all, his hand pressed to his bleeding shoulder. "This ain't the end," he spat, but he stumbled back to his horse nonetheless. With difficulty, he hauled himself into the saddle and wheeled the animal around. "You'll regret this," he called over his shoulder as he rode away. "All of you." When the sound of hoofbeats had faded, Flynn turned to Jenkins. "Didn't expect to see you coming to our aid." Jenkins shrugged, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. "Like I said, I don't like it when folks try to renege on deals. Bad for business." He tipped his hat to Abigail. "Madam. Sorry about the rough handling back in town. Nothing personal." Abigail nodded stiffly, still shaken by Thomas's appearance and the violence that had followed. "You might want to watch your backs," Jenkins continued. "That one's got a mean streak when he's drinking. And lately, he's always drinking." After Jenkins departed, Flynn gently led Abigail back to the cabin. She was trembling, spilled berries forgotten in the wake of the confrontation. "Are you hurt?" Flynn asked, examining the red marks on her arm where Thomas had grabbed her. "No," Abigail whispered. "Just frightened." Flynn's expression darkened. "He won't touch you again, I promise you that." "You can't be with me every moment," Abigail said, her voice stronger now. "And I won't live in fear, jumping at shadows." Flynn hesitated, then reached into a trunk near his sleeping pallet. He withdrew a small revolver. "This was Rebecca's," he said quietly. "She never got the chance to use it. I'd like you to have it." Abigail stared at the weapon. "I don't know how to shoot." "I'll teach you," Flynn promised. "Tomorrow. For tonight, just keep it close." That night, the boundaries between them shifted. Instead of sleeping by the fire, Flynn made his pallet near the door, positioned to intercept anyone entering the cabin. His vigilance both comforted and saddened Abigail. Once again, violence had invaded her life, bringing fear in its wake. True to his word, Flynn began teaching Abigail to handle the revolver the next day. Her first attempts at hitting targets canned set on a fallen log were dismal, but Flynn was a patient teacher. "Take your time," he instructed, standing close behind her to adjust her stance. "Breathe out as you squeeze the trigger, don't pull it." Abigail was acutely aware of his proximity, the warmth of his breath stirring the hair near her ear. His hands were gentle as they positioned her arms, so different from Thomas's rough handling. By the end of the week, she could hit the cans more often than not, and the weight of the revolver in her hand no longer felt so alien. "You're a natural," Flynn praised after she hit 3 cans in succession. Abigail laughed, a sound that had become more frequent in recent weeks. "Hardly, but I'm improving." Flynn watched her reload the revolver with growing confidence. "You're not the same woman I met in that cabin in Calistoga," he observed. "You're stronger now, more certain of yourself." Abigail considered his words as she carefully returned the revolver to its holster. "I suppose I am," she agreed. "Thomas, he had a way of making me feel small, worthless. Like I should be grateful he bothered with me at all." "Men like that," Flynn said quietly, "they only feel big when they're making others feel small." Abigail nodded. "I see that now, but then, it was like being in a fog, everything distorted, no clear path forward." She looked up at him. "Thank you for helping me find my way out." Flynn's eyes held hers for a long moment. "You were finding your own way out the moment you fought against Jenkins. I just offered a hand." Their gazes remained locked, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Flynn took a step forward, hesitant, questioning. Abigail didn't back away. The moment was shattered by the distant sound of multiple horses approaching. Flynn was instantly alert, reaching for his rifle. "Get inside," he told Abigail. "Take your revolver." Abigail hurried to obey, her heart pounding. From the cabin window she watched as 4 riders emerged from the trees. Thomas was in the lead, his arm in a crude sling. Beside him rode the Malone brothers, notorious troublemakers from the mining camps, and bringing up the rear was Oscar Whitley, the owner of Calistoga's seediest saloon. Flynn stood his ground as the men approached, his rifle held ready but not aimed. "Hayward," he acknowledged coldly. "I thought our last conversation was clear enough." Thomas dismounted, swaying slightly. His eyes were bloodshot, his face haggard. "You stole my wife," he slurred, "turned her against me." "You sold her," Flynn corrected. "Twice. And she turned against you all on her own when you treated her like property." The Malone brothers dismounted as well, flanking Thomas. They were burly, unshaven men with matching sneers. "4 against 1, the elder Malone observed. "Not good odds for you, Winters." "5 against 2, Abigail said clearly, stepping out of the cabin with her revolver drawn. "And I'm quite a good shot now." Flynn shot her a look part exasperation, part admiration. "I told you to stay inside." "I'm done hiding," Abigail replied, moving to stand beside him. She faced Thomas squarely. "Go home, Thomas, it's over." Thomas's face twisted with rage. "It's over when I say it's over. You're my wife, not anymore," said a new voice. Sheriff Lawson rode into the clearing, accompanied by Reverend Holbrook and, surprisingly, Jenkins. "Got the paperwork right here, Hayward. Divorce decree, signed by Judge Wilson yesterday." He held out an official-looking document. "Seems selling your wife for whiskey and gold is grounds for immediate divorce in the state of California, especially when you brag about it all over town." Thomas lunged for the paper, but Sheriff Lawson held it out of reach. "This is a copy. Originals filed at the courthouse." He fixed Thomas with a stern look. "You're making a nuisance of yourself, Hayward. These folks have witnesses to your selling your wife and to your trespassing and threatening behavior. I suggest you leave now, while you still can." The Malone brothers exchanged glances, clearly reassessing the situation now that the law was involved. "We was just helping a friend recover his property," the younger one muttered. "Didn't know nothing about no divorce." "Mrs. Hayward, Miss Hayward now, I suppose is not and never was property," Reverend Holbrook said firmly. and I'm ashamed for our community that she was treated as such." Thomas looked from face to face, searching for an ally and finding none. Even Whitley was backing toward his horse, unwilling to defy the sheriff openly. "Fine," Thomas spat finally. "Take the whore. She wasn't worth the trouble anyhow." Flynn moved so fast that no one saw the punch coming. Thomas hit the ground hard, blood streaming from his nose. "You will apologize to Miss Hayward," Flynn said, his voice deadly quiet, "or the next one breaks your jaw." Thomas staggered to his feet, aided reluctantly by the elder Malone. Blood dripped down his chin as he glared at Abigail. "Sorry," he muttered insincerely. Sheriff Lawson sighed. "Get him out of here," he told the Malones. "And if I see any of you on this property again, you'll be spending time in my jail." As Thomas and his reluctant allies departed, Reverend Holbrook approached Abigail with a kind smile. "Miss Hayward, I brought the divorce papers as soon as the judge signed them. I hope they bring you some peace." Abigail accepted the document with trembling hands. "Thank you, Reverend. This means more than I can say." "You deserve a fresh start, my dear," the Reverend said, patting her hand. "Every soul does." He glanced meaningfully at Flynn. "Sometimes fresh starts come in unexpected packages." After the visitors had gone, Abigail and Flynn stood in silence, the divorce decree held carefully in her hands. "You're free," Flynn said finally. "Truly free now." Abigail looked up at him, seeing the uncertainty in his eyes. "Yes," she agreed. "Free to choose my own path, my own companions." Flynn swallowed hard. "And what path might you be considering?" Instead of answering, Abigail carefully set the divorce papers on a nearby stump. Then she stepped forward and placed her hand on Flynn's chest, feeling his heart race beneath her palm. "The path that leads right here," she said softly. "If you'll walk it with me." Flynn's hands came up to cradle her face, his touch as gentle as if she were made of porcelain. "Are you sure?" "After everything you've been through," Abigail silenced him by rising on her tiptoes and pressing her lips to his. It was a tentative kiss, questioning, but it deepened as Flynn responded with carefully restrained passion. When they finally drew apart, both breathing harder, Flynn rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the day we picked blackberries by the stream," he admitted. Abigail smiled. "I've wanted you to do it since the day you taught me to shoot." Flynn laughed, the sound full of relief and joy. "We've wasted time then." "No," Abigail said, serious now, "not wasted. I needed that time to find myself again, to be sure." Flynn nodded, understanding in his eyes. "And now?" "Now," Abigail said, taking his hand and leading him toward the cabin. "We make up for that time." The autumn passed in a golden haze of happiness. Abigail and Flynn moved through their days together with growing ease, the boundaries between them dissolved by love freely given and received. They prepared the cabin for winter, preserving food, gathering firewood, and making repairs to keep out the cold. Word spread in Calistoga about the couple living in the woods. Some gossips clucked their tongues at the impropriety, but others, particularly those who knew Thomas Hayward's nature, expressed quiet approval. In late November, as the first snow dusted the pine trees, Flynn surprised Abigail by kneeling before her as she sat mending by the fire. "I'm not a wealthy man," he said, holding out a small wooden box. "And I know you've had reason to distrust the institution of marriage, but I love you, Abigail, and I want to spend my life with you. Will you marry me?" Inside the box was a simple gold band. "It was my mother's," Flynn explained. "She and my father had 40 happy years together." Tears filled Abigail's eyes as she looked from the ring to Flynn's hopeful face. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." They were wed 2 weeks later in Reverend Holbrook's small church in Calistoga. The ceremony was simple. With only a few witnesses, Sheriff Lawson and his wife, the kindly widow who ran the general store, and surprisingly, Jenkins, who presented them with a fine bay stallion as a wedding gift. "For breeding with your mare," he explained gruffly to Abigail. "Should produce good foals." As they rode back to their cabin that evening, snowflakes drifting around them, Abigail leaned back against Flynn's chest. "Happy?" he asked, his arms secure around her waist. "Beyond words," she replied, turning her face up for a kiss that tasted of promise and forever. Spring brought new beginnings. The stream swelled with snowmelt, wildflowers carpeted the forest floor, and Abigail's belly began to round with their first child. "A girl," Flynn predicted, his hand gentle on the curve of her stomach, with her mother's courage and beauty. "A boy," Abigail countered, laughing, "with his father's kindness and strength." In June of 1877, as the summer heat settled over the land, Abigail gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl, whom they named Ethan and Eliza. Flynn paced anxiously outside the cabin during the birth, the midwife having shooed him out with assurances that everything was proceeding normally. When he was finally allowed inside, the sight of Abigail propped up in bed, a tiny bundle in each arm, brought him to his knees beside her. "Look what we made," Abigail whispered, her face radiant despite her exhaustion. Flynn touched each tiny face with wondering fingers. "They're perfect," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Like their mother." As the twins grew, so did the Winters enterprise. Flynn's trapping business expanded, and Abigail started selling her herbal remedies and preserves in town. They built an addition to the cabin, and then another as their family grew to include another son, Samuel, born 2 years after the twins. Thomas Hayward eventually left Calistoga, driven out by debts and his own increasing drunkenness. The last Abigail heard, he had died in a bar fight in Nevada, unmourned and forgotten. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Flynn presented Abigail with a deed. "I bought the Jenkins claim," he explained. "All the land between here and the main road is ours now. I thought we might build a proper house closer to town, for the children's schooling." Abigail studied the deed, then looked around at the cabin that had been her sanctuary and her first true home. "Can we keep this place too? For summers, perhaps. I'd hate to leave it entirely." Flynn pulled her close. "Of course. This will always be ours, our beginning." By the time Eliza and Ethan were 10, the Winters family was well established in Calistoga society. Their new home, a handsome 2-story structure on the outskirts of town, was known for its hospitality. Flynn had leveraged his trapping knowledge into a successful trading business, and Abigail's herbal remedies were sought after throughout Napa Valley. They still spent summers at the cabin, teaching their children to hunt, fish, and identify the healing plants that grew in the forest. Abigail often reflected on how different her life had become from those dark days with Thomas. The fear and uncertainty were distant memories, replaced by confidence and joy. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their cabin watching their children chase fireflies, Flynn took Abigail's hand. "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if I hadn't walked into that cabin in Calistoga that day?" Abigail leaned her head against his shoulder. "Sometimes. But then I think perhaps we were always meant to find each other, that all roads would have led us here." Flynn pressed a kiss to her temple. "I like that thought, that no matter what, we would have found our way to each other. To think," Abigail mused, "it all began with a trade gold and whiskey for a woman." "The best trade I ever made," Flynn said, his arms tightening around her. "Though I would have paid far more than double for you, my love." Abigail smiled up at him. "I know. But then, the best things in life, like love, can't truly be bought or sold, only freely given." As darkness fell, and their children's laughter echoed among the pines, Abigail and Flynn Winters held each other close, grateful for the chance encounter that had brought them together and the love that had transformed them both. Years later, when their grandchildren begged for the story of how Grandma and Grandpa met, Flynn would wink at Abigail before beginning. "Well, it all started when your grandmother's good-for-nothing first husband traded her for gold and whiskey." And Abigail would smile, remembering the frightened young woman she had been and the journey that had brought her to this moment. Surrounded by the family she and Flynn had built together, a family founded not on ownership or obligation, but on choice, respect, and enduring love. By their 50th wedding anniversary, Flynn and Abigail's legacy extended throughout Napa Valley. Their trading business, now run by Ethan and Samuel, was one of the largest in Northern California. Eliza had become a respected doctor, using both conventional medicine and her mother's herbal knowledge to heal the sick. The cabin in the woods was preserved as a family retreat, each generation adding their own touches while respecting its simple origins. And whenever Abigail visited, she would pause by the stream where she had once picked blackberries, remembering the day when fear gave way to courage and a new life began. "I never thought I could be this happy," she told Flynn as they sat together on a bench by that same stream, their hands weathered with age but still entwined. "That night when you bought my freedom, I was just hoping to survive." Flynn raised her hand to his lips. "You did more than survive, my love. You thrived, and you taught me to thrive alongside you." As the sun set on their long life together, casting golden light through the pines, Abigail leaned against her husband's shoulder, secure in the knowledge that some trades like the one that had brought them together changed the world for the better, one heart at a time. And in Calistoga, California, the story of the woman who was traded for gold and whiskey, and the cowboy who paid double just to set her free, became a legend passed down through generations, a testament to the power of love to transform even the darkest circumstances into a life of joy and meaning.